WNST, Tassa, Baltimore, and of course, Baltimore positive. We have remained calm here through the storm, and we're now into summer. We still have no baseball. We still think we might have football, and college football's had all sorts of things. And I just got back from a 5-day respite on the shores of North Carolina, and much like James Taylor, I could not take my Taharka ice cream with me, but I did take some world-famous chicken from Royal Farms, and I'm wearing my last year Chicken Palooza shirt. We're about to go into the new Palooza here, but it is a summer Palooza, and the baseball story has trickled and trickled and trickled, and I know Luke Jones has been following and writing about it out at WNST.net, as well as pointing out some great Ravens memories that we'll get to. But Luke, it's July now, right? And here we are, and they're going to play. They're not going to play. They might play. Looks like they're going to play. They're going to try to play. You are the biggest baseball fan I know. You cover the Orioles for us. You cover baseball for us. I just want to give you some oxygen to just discuss whatever you want to discuss over the last 2 or 3 weeks as far as where this thing is gone, and then what's your expectation for it at this point?
Yeah, I think that's the key word. You just said it, expectation, and you said try. And, I think there's just still so much unknown. We know now there's a 60-game schedule after weeks and months of trying to figure this out. Keep in mind, in late March, they agreed to prorated pay. I kept coming back to that point to you over and over and over, and the owners, at least from my perspective, the owners they kept trying to move the goalpost on this thing. But we have a 60-game season. We have some very strange rules. As you know, Nestor, as someone who has been a lifelong baseball fan, 60 games in the context of a normal 162-game season, you can have a heck of a lot of variance. You can have great teams that play poorly for 60 games. You can have bad teams play pretty darn well for 60 games. So
I saw the Detroit Tigers go 35-5 in the first 40 games.
Yeah,
right?
I've used the example with a few people.
How about the Rockies a couple years ago, right?
I think back to, remember the 2010 Orioles. They canned Tremblay. Juan Samuel was the interim during the summer. That team was on pace to be 2018 Orioles like. Buck Showalter comes in. They went 34-23 at the end. Now, I'm not saying that's happening for the Orioles this year by any stretch, but there's going to be some team in there that you just kind of say, what the heck is going on here? And then you remind yourself, oh, this isn't a real season. This is
it's 1981. It's a fake season.
Yeah. So, but I'd say putting the business portion of it aside just for a moment, because that's the part when you talk about how this thing's going to play out moving forward. Even if they have a 62 games or a 60-game season without too many glitches from a health standpoint or whatever else comes up here in this weird 2020 calendar year, you wonder what's going to happen in the offseason. You wonder what's going to happen next spring. You wonder what's going to happen certainly after the CBA expires next year. So beyond that, there are some elements to this 2020 abbreviated season with a universal DH, with a runner on second to begin extra innings. We already know about the 3-batter minimum that was going to go into effect anyway for a relief pitcher. There are elements to this, Nestor, from a long-term standpoint as it pertains to the game itself. I'm interested to see how that plays out and to see if maybe by their sheer incompetence, maybe baseball comes across something that, hey, this is actually an element that might work in the future. And maybe it becomes, at some point in the next CBA or two where maybe you go from 162 games to, 144. I don't know. But I like the idea of, part of me likes the idea amidst all the frustration here of some different elements to the game that you can try out and see what this looks like. And I don't know. Maybe it works out. Maybe it's just weird. Maybe they might shut down 2 weeks in because virus spikes. I have no idea. But
I'm glad at this point in my life I'm not like life and death with baseball like I was in 1994, right? I feel very, very differently about it, right? Like literally, and I'll share a little story with you. I've done all the Tony Robbins stuff and whatever, and I was down in Nags Head last week with my wife. And I had sort of an epiphany, in the Outer Banks once in my life. I had done a Tony Robbins firewalk. It was the summer of 1994, Luke. So my hair was longer than it even is now, and it's getting pretty long back here again. I'm going to need Brad Pennington to call him in for that. But I went down to Nags Head, and I spent a week alone down there in this big house, on stilts back in the summer of 1994. There was no WNST. There were no Baltimore Ravens, if you remember. If you really remember, there was already a Carolina Panthers and a Jacksonville Jaguars and all of that. And baseball was threatening a strike. And I remember being in this big house and wondering, what am I going to do, the upstart nasty Nestor doing sports radio with no baseball in a non-NFL city. And, I was down in Nags Head again last week and monitoring the baseball situation and thinking about that summer of 1994 and how bitter people were, and certainly people in Baltimore, dude, right? Like, we had just built this stadium. Ripken's in the middle of the streak. We're finally, after all of the years, and by the way, I want to give a little plug to all of my programming this week, Luke, because you don't know this, but I've gone into baseball mode this week. Maybe it's something about being in Nags Head and thinking about 94 and reading up on baseball and having people ask me about my cousin recently and weird things. But I've got Tim Wendell this week. I've got Hall of Famer John Schuerholz this week. Steve Russian and I are going to compare Fred Lynn and Jim Rice notes from the 70s. I'm also going to have Ken Singleton on a little later on, and Maury Brown from Forbes, and, of course, Bizball Maury, my baseball insider. Sam Kavaris is going to join me this week from Jacksonville, talking some baseball as well. Baltimorean Sam Kavaris, of course, and Eric Fisher, formerly of Sports Business Journal. Jason Cole, my football compadre, also loves baseball, is going to join us this week. So I'm going to have a lot of baseball conversations. And, dude, I don't know if it's a 4th of July or whether Nags Head got me stirred up and thinking about coming back from Nags Head in 94 to a radio show with no baseball team. I came back from Nags Head that week, like on August 6th, right? And they went on strike a few days later. And I spent the whole time in Nags Head trying to, develop, what am I going to talk about if they go on strike? I'm 2 years into a radio career. And now I'm 30 years into a career, and I'm sitting down in Nags Head drawing up a whole Baltimore positive roadmap for myself, as well as you and Peter and our company. But I'm thinking, where does baseball fit in this? Where does baseball fit in the future of Baltimore, in the future of hotels downtown and restaurants? And as I walked through Harbor Place last night, where does baseball fit in my life, the rest of my life? Where does Camden Yards fit in? Where does baseball fit in everyone's life if they pair this back to 60 games or 100 games or whatever they would do, which would destroy all the records, right? Like all the things that baseball held near and dear in 154 and 162 and, 57 games and 61 home runs and all of these things that, quite frankly, Luke, 5.5 months into a pandemic now, a worldwide pandemic where I couldn't get people to wear masks, around my compromised wife in North Carolina, I'm really questioning the value of baseball in my life. And I'm going to ask Tim Wendell and Steve Russian, John Schuerholz and Ken Singleton, all of us have made our living off of baseball. Like, our whole lives, baseball has been a huge part of our life. And now, certainly given where the Orioles are and whether they can go 30-30 in 60 games and shock the world or whatever, they're an awful organization. They're awful people. Just watching the last 6 months of this thing go on, the Trey Mancini thing notwithstanding, and I think it's an incredible story, but just where's the lease? Where's the future? Where's the orange flag in the Inner Harbor saying, we are Baltimore, and we're here, and we're a part of the community, and this virus is terrible, and let's do something? They don't do anything. They don't do anything, and now they're going to roll the ball out in a season where they didn't want to play, where they fought about not playing. They're not going to let anybody in. We're going to allegedly watch on TV. I don't know, Luke. I'm trying to figure out the value of all of this and why they're even bothering to play other than over money, right? And I guess we get back to that because you wanted to avoid the money part of it, but that's just my piece on it. And I'm going to give everybody a chance to give their piece, but it really pissed me off as I sat around in North Carolina last week for a half of 3 days, trying to get a little bit of sun and do something normal for the first time in 2020, that this is where baseball is, and that I built my life around this 26 years ago in the summer there, Like, it's shame on me for caring so much about them. They don't care about us.
Well, I would challenge. You could say that about a lot of entertainment-driven industries at the end of the day.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So I think some of where you're coming from with what you just said, I think, and I don't want to speak for you, I think a lot of it's a product that we've all experienced over the last 4 months, just in general. I think whether we're talking baseball, whether we're talking pro sports, whether we're talking entertainment, whether we're talking, many of us even talking about our jobs, our career fields.
Yeah, can't you people figure it out and put a mask on? It isn't that hard. You know what I mean? Like, literally,
sure,
right?
But my point is, when you've had your entire way of life upended, disrupted, come to a screeching halt, I think you reevaluate everything in your life. And that doesn't mean everything becomes bad or everything becomes irrelevant. Sometimes it just means you prioritize a little bit differently. I think, whether you're talking about religion and your faith or sports or, what you do with your disposable income.
Or what your family means to you after they've been living with you for 4.5 months.
Sure, or family that you haven't been able to see or friends that you haven't been able to see. So I think some of that, is just kind of universal across the board. But when you do look at baseball, and specifically here in Baltimore, it's funny. I was talking to my brother-in-law over the weekend about this, and I thought how strange it was when you kind of look at the Orioles' position, specifically from an on-field standpoint, knowing they're in the midst of a pretty exhaustive rebuilding process here, that if you really had your way about it, you would almost say, the major league team could probably abstain from playing, and could we have a minor league season for Adley Rutschman and for Grayson Rodriguez and all the different prospects that you hope are part of the next big Oriole team? So that's where it is tough. And then you bring in discussion about the lease, and then you bring in the discussion about labor in general for the sport and what's ahead post-2021. Heck, what's ahead in the unknown?
I'm trying to figure out the value of the franchise to the community. Like that was always the thing that was pitched, that we're going to build this stadium, it's going to fill these hotels, it's going to feed the economy, it's going to feed the tax base, it's going to help the schools, it's going to help urban America, it's going to help the city, it's going to, all of this stuff as to what sports is supposed to be. I'm having an existential crisis with this, at this point, where 26 summers later, I'm sitting in the same town, Kill Devil Hills, at the same custard stand, which, by the way, is fantastic custard, It's not the Hark ice cream, I'll tell you. It's not honey graham, I promise you that, but it's pretty good when you're on vacation for some cherry cheesecake. But, and thinking to myself, what do we do? Why do we care? Why should I care about the fortunes of John and Louis Angelos and their business that has very, very little care or concern for the tax base and the community and all these things that they weren't even a part of back in the 1980s when Marty Conway comes on and talks to me about how they had to get bonds and lottery and governors and council people and senators and everybody on board to put shovels in the dirt to keep this baseball team that was brought here in 1954 and created some magic in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s.
A lot of magic.
And we wanted to preserve that, and that was important. It was so important that we sat out of Memorial Stadium and babbled and cried in October 1991. I know I did. So, and then I sit in the Outer Banks last week and once again say, what are they doing? What are they doing? And, I guess they're going to play, right? I mean, that's where we are now. All bitching aside, like, they are going to start hitting fungos at Camden Yards next week or like that, right? Like something like that.
Yeah, I mean, as of now, it's going to get started, or at least they're going to try to get it started. And, again, we keep coming back to the unknown that is just so pervasive in every aspect of our life right now. But, I think, some of what you just mentioned, it's fair. I mean, I can tell you, as someone who's going to be 37 years old in October, the idea of the Baltimore Orioles that existed prior to my existence certainly
the concept. It's kind of like America before Trump took over. The concept of it. Yes.
Anything that we've seen over the last 35 years, post 1983, with some pretty decent exceptions and stretches in there, notwithstanding. It's funny you just mentioned, why should I care? Why should people be passionate about this at this point?
Well, they don't care. I guess that was my point. You know what I mean? They don't want to play. The Orioles, the family that owns the Orioles, has in no way shown any interest in getting involved in anything other than sending out one tweet from Nashville 3 months ago. Like, it's deplorable. It really is, on the last year of their lease. And then they're going to leak out some information to Barker 2 weeks ago at the Sun, like anybody's reading it or believing it, that somehow, like, they're in negotiations or something. How about you come back here and front face the community? How about you do that? That's all I would ask. Even if you're not going to play baseball, front face the community with more than the cartoon bird on the internet and telling me the bird won mascot of the century or something.
Yeah, and that's fair. I'm not going to argue with you on that. But, to get back to why people care is because there is a tradition here. There are people that are still very passionate about baseball in Baltimore. It's not apparent when you're talking about having a team that's lost well over 100 games the last 2 years. But I will say this: recently came across the Delman Young double game over the last week or two, and I still got goosebumps watching it because you could hear the crowd reaction at Camden Yards.
Dude, I've sat here and watched the 1979 World Series, right?
Yeah,
I've watched the 1983 ALCS.
But that's why people care, Nestor, and that's why people still want to hold on to that. Now, they might not be holding on as tightly, 162 games a year by any stretch. I think you'd have to question your sanity if you were living and dying with every night of the 2018 or 2019 Orioles. But if you want to talk about 2014, if you want to talk about 2012, if you want to talk about 1997, a team that was really special to me.
I watched the Seattle game, by the way. I told you that, right? I watched the Kingdom game a couple weeks ago. Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, those are the reasons why people still care. But, in the short term, especially when you just consider the reality of where we are right now as a society and things that we can or can't do, and certainly going to a sporting event isn't something that appears to be on the horizon in any kind of normal fashion, then, we are going to question things a little bit more. And specifically for the Orioles, I mean, long before we ever heard the term coronavirus, we knew 2020 wasn't going to be a relevant season in terms of wins and losses for them. So you throw what's happened with Trey Mancini and just thinking about his health, his long-term well-being, let alone getting back to being in the heart of the Orioles lineup, and just the uncertainty that comes with any rebuilding type of proposition, then, I mean, some of the things that you say, I'm not going to sit here and try to make some argument on why Baltimoreans should care very deeply about the 2020 Orioles. I mean, I'd be disingenuous to try to make that argument.
That's why we're going to talk about football soon.
Well, and that's why I said in a perfect world, I'd love to see the Orioles be able to have a minor league season, and if they could trade off and just say, well, the major leaguers, you guys just go hang out.
Hey, you'll be very proud of me. While we're in this segment doing baseball, I communicated with a dear friend of mine in the Orioles organization last week, and I drove down 301 past the Bowie Stadium, and I honked the horn, right? And then we drove over the bridge into Virginia, and we took sort of the left-hand turn at Torrey Smith's house, and we went down the riverway where the late, great Ted Marchibroda spent the last years of his life, down toward, on the riverway in eastern Virginia, on those finger rivers down there, and we fingered our way all the way down to Norfolk, and I actually passed the Norfolk Stadium, where Machado played a little in Markakis, or I guess it was Markakis may have played in Ottawa. I don't know. Either way, I'm trying to think of all the greats that came from Norfolk. I did pass Rochester Silver Stadium one time in my life, too. I was in Rochester once, where Ripken.
And then we always forget about Ottawa, right?
Ottawa was more the Bedard era. Yes,
yeah.
But I did pass Bowie and Norfolk on the way to Nags Head, so I went by both stadiums, literally. And I thought to myself, They used to play baseball here. I wonder what it looked like, you know? And the Norfolk Stadium, by the way, isn't position where I thought it was. I thought it was like down in a different area, and I had to like do a Google Map thing, and I my wife and I went in and had a burger and a beer, stopped and saw a little bit of Norfolk on the way through, but a lot of water in Norfolk, a lot of military in Norfolk, a lot of planes, a lot of boats, a lot of stuff. But that's where the Orioles are, and just driving through there and the town all rolled up, I thought, man, I wonder what it looks like when 7,000 people come down here and they go to a baseball game, because it's a cute little town, It'd be fun to go to a ball game there.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because that going back to this, why should we care? And to make it beyond just a Baltimore thing, but as a baseball fan thing, and that's what's happening with the minor leagues now. Some of it that was very much on the horizon from a deliberate standpoint, with Major League Baseball wanting to contract and eliminate some teams, or not make teams no longer be affiliates, and then not having any idea what that's going to mean for that local community. This really, the Orioles, the 30 Major League Baseball teams in some shape and fashion, long term will be fine. But you do look at some of these smaller communities that have minor league teams, and I think about the value of those cities, those towns, those minor league teams where, we talk about Bowie and we talk about Norfolk and Frederick and Delmarva and Aberdeen, even the Gulf Coast League Orioles. But, you think of every team that has those various affiliates, and you think how many baseball fans are spawned from some community that might be, their closest major league team might be 5 or 6 hours away.
I remember Ben McDonald. I'm trying to chase down Ben this week, too, to get him on. Ben McDonald and I went to lunch together with Brad Pennington, and we were at the Benihana in Toronto in the summer of 1993 or 4. 3, I think, but but it might have been 4. And we're sitting there and just talking about life, and we're all sort of the same age. We might all literally be born in 68, 67. We're the same age. And Ben McDonald told me that he went to one Major League Baseball game in his life. And his father drove him from Louisiana to Houston, and he saw Nolan Ryan pitch at the Astrodome. And that's the only game he ever saw till he walked out of that bullpen that night when I was in Ocean City with Johnny Raffalidis, watching that game when he walked out and relief pitched that night, after he was drafted. And, Pennington said that he had been to a handful of games. He grew up near Cincinnati. Okay. So he had been to some games, but he was like, may have been to 10 games. He didn't go to 5 games a year. Like, my dad and I went to 30, 40 games a year.
Sure.
Like, not everybody grew up like that, right? Not everybody could take the 23 to the 22 and stop and see Andy up at G&A Coney Island Hot Dog in Highlandtown and get a chili dog for 60 cents back then. And take it out to the ballpark. So, I'm with you. Baseball to most of America is the little stadium at the end of the field in the town they were in. Or as my wife pointed out, every town we passed, Luke, every town, she would say, they got a home run fence there, honey.
Yeah, there you go.
She taunts me with that the same way you do.
And that's, and that's the beauty of the game. You just mentioned Ben McDonald, who went to one Major League game growing up, and talking about one of the all-time great college pitchers there, number 1 overall pick, regardless of the fact that he didn't pan out to become a Hall of Fame Major League
You know what
pitcher.
I think he told me? I think he said, my daddy took me to see the Zephyrs. And I'm like, that right? They were the team that played New Orleans, right?
Right, exactly. So you have, and I can remember talking to you probably last fall. It might have been right around the World Series, somewhere around there. And we were talking about television ratings and being lackluster. But the one thing I pointed out to you, and I believe the New York Times had just put out a piece, and it talked about how many millions across the country, talking minor league baseball coupled with Major League Baseball, had gone to games in 2019. And that was my argument for. As much as you look at the Major League product and issues with it and cheating scandals, and now we're talking so much about labor, and we will continue to talk about labor over the next 2 years with what at this point feels like is going to be inevitably a work stoppage post-2021. I don't want it to be, but I don't know how you can't look at that and expect anything other than that at this point based on how the last few months played out. But when I talked about the long-term viability of the game, so much of it was pointing back to the minor leagues and how many people go to games and how many fans, young fans, who are going out and, some minor league ballpark that has a carousel beyond left center field, and they have all the silliness that you see between innings of minor league baseball. That's really.
Dude, I went to a Major League Baseball game last year, and they were floating bubbles and fake snowflakes out in center field.
Yeah.
And it's Christmas in July. I mean, McAllen nerds out on the Star Wars nights, right?
Yeah,
people bring their dogs to the ballpark now. I mean, the fact that they're not milking cows at second base at Camden Yards is shocking to me. And how about putting chicken palooza on the jerseys for the month of July? What do you think of that?
Sure. No, hey, I would be all for that. Loving Rofo chicken, but but I will say with some of that campiness, some of that silliness, you're still cultivating young baseball fans out of that, and that's where I see how baseball's the conversations about the minor leagues here, and I just shudder, and I just think, what are you doing to yourself? Okay. From a bottom line perspective, from a financial perspective, I get that in terms of 2020 and maybe even 2025, but what are you doing to yourself for 2035? What are you doing to yourself for 2040 if you're just going to strip so much of that away and that kid that lives 5 hours outside of a major league market, their minor league baseball team goes away. Guess what? That kid's going to be watching other sports and getting involved in other things, and when they grow up and they move to a city or a suburban area of a major league team, they're not going to feel any inclination to go watch that. So, I'm being a little dramatic in saying that, but that's where the value of the minor leagues is, and that's where I'm sad to see not just what's happening big picture, but also the short term, even the minor league teams right now that aren't being planned to be contracted or to lose their affiliation. You just think what this summer is doing to them financially and what it's doing to those communities. As you just said, I mean, some of these smaller towns, they're very vibrant on a summer night when they're at least a few thousand people out at the ballpark, and they're having fireworks and they're giving away like Bowie giving away a Manny Machado bobblehead or something like that. I mean, you're just not seeing that this summer, and it's not just baseball. It's so many different things that we're used to doing from a recreational standpoint, and that makes me sad. And but like I said, from a long-term standpoint, what that means for the game of baseball, it very much concerns me as someone who's still a passionate fan through a lot of frustration that we've experienced here recently.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. You can find him just about anywhere Baltimore Luke travels. Football, baseball, pizza, New Jersey, summers. A little 4th of July. I'm stretching out. I'm doing baseball. I'm going to do hot dogs before it's all over with Andy at G&A before the week's over as well. And I guess for summertime, for all of us to have a little bit of normalcy, for you, your mom, your family, a tradition unlike any other for you and Wildwood, correct?
Absolutely. Heading down there this week and doing my, not going to be my typical vacation because of obvious reasons with the pandemic, but, things have looked pretty good in New Jersey recently, and so we're going to go and be careful and be vigilant and, not do all the same things we normally do, but still get some of that beach air and get some of some pizza and do all those things we like to do on the Jersey Shore, but certainly be contemplating baseball and contemplating football, but it'll be nice to unplug a little bit. I think these days we all could benefit from unplugging a little bit from time to time, just given how much discouraging news is out there.
I don't want you watching any baseball while you're at the beach this summer, and I've threatened you every year to not watch baseball. This year, no baseball for you. Concentrate on your mother and your sister and your brother.
You know what? I won't have any problem because the baseball season won't be started by then, so how's that?
Well, I hope, wear some SPF. Don't come home with the shingles or anything weird, and don't get bitten by any sharks. Don't eat too much pizza, and by all means...
I can't promise that.
Drink all the beer you want to drink, all right? So
that sounds good.
Full up on that. Luke Jones joining us. Baseball, football, hopefully returning, and certainly Baltimore positive all over the place as we use this summer of 2020 to sort of take a deep breath. I'm going to be here talking to great people about great stuff. Lots of 4th of July, American conversation, patriotism conversation, baseball conversation coming up this week. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, keeping calm, staying local. Chicken Palooza, it's on at Rofo, and Baltimore Positive.